Greetings Appalachians, Wanderer here. I'm finally back with a new video. So as the title of this video states, over the course of about 2 weeks I managed to craft 100,000 plus ultracite ammo. Now before I jump in here and show you exactly how I managed to do this, let's talk about why I did it and the setup I used for it. So first off, why craft this much ammo? I mean, that's a lot of ammo. Most people won't ever go through that much. Well, basically because people said I couldn't. This is not a direct defense of the 900 hour guy. I have no idea whether or not 900 hour guy actually crafted that ammo legitimately or not, or whether he had other items that were unobtainable in the amount of time he'd played. But in my opinion, I thought that crafting that much ammo at least was probably feasible. Now as to whether or not this guy is legit or not, I have no idea. This is not a video trying to prove that he's legit. I just wanted to try and prove that crafting 100,000 plus ultracite ammo was possible, not just over the course of the entire game's life, but just over the course of a couple weeks, because so many people on Reddit told me it could not be done. Now before I jump in here and start talking about how I farmed each individual material and how much of each I needed and all that kind of stuff, I wanted to talk about the setup I used when doing this. So I use 2 accounts when I play Fallout 76. Basically I have a pretty powerful computer. I bought a second account whenever the game was on sale, so I have 2 accounts that I can use whenever I am playing. This is very, very useful if you're wanting to mule stuff back and forth between your accounts, or if you want to get more bang for your buck out of things like farming Flux. Say you nuke the Queen and you want to farm Violet Flux, well, now you can take 2 characters down there instead of 1. You can also bring your second character to the fight and just have them tag the Queen at the very end to make sure that both characters get credit, so you get double the legendaries, double the ultracite, double the event rewards, all that kind of stuff. So it's really cool to be able to do that. So for this, I emptied out one of my mule characters to hold everything, and I made use of both my level 300 plus bloodied heavy weapons build and my level 70 plus bloodied heavy weapons build. The core perks and mutations and the kind of weapons they use, etc. are pretty much the same on both characters. One is just on a separate account, so I can run them both at the same time. In terms of the advantages this afforded me, I didn't have to have a friend to reload Whitesprings to farm all the stuff that I needed from there, like glowing and hardened mass, etc. I was also able to get double the amount of raw violet flux every silo run I did on the Queen, because, well, I pretty much had to nuke there myself every time, because relying on other people to nuke, it wasn't happening. People either nuked in very poor spots where I only got maybe 50 to 100 raw violet flux per run, or I just couldn't get nukes at all. So I ended up doing 99% of the nukes myself for this. If you want more information on my Blight Heavy Weapons build, I will be making a video going over that build. Suffice to say that it is extremely high DPS, and it's a lot more tanky than you would think. I can take several hits from the Queen by relying on emergency protocols. I really never die in this build, at least in PvE. I did do some of this also on the survival server. I found that it really wasn't worth my time to go there because I ended up doing so much PvP, at least in the first couple of days of survival. It just seemed like all the PvPers were over there, and even though I did fare pretty well against most of them, it just wasn't worth my time because by nuking a spot, I was putting a giant target on myself saying, hey, come and find me and kill me here. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of this video, how I actually farmed all this stuff. That's why you're here, I'm sure. For the type of ammo, I chose 50 caliber, obviously because it's the highest amount you can get per craft of Violet Flux, although it does require quite a bit of steel and lead. I could have gone the 5mm route, which I think is a little bit cheaper to craft, but 50 caliber is what I normally use because I use the 50 caliber machine gun almost exclusively. So when crafting this stuff, obviously I used as many perks as I could to get as much as I could out of my materials. So I used the Ammo Smith perk to craft 180 per craft of the 50 caliber ultracite ammo, and then I also used Super Duper, which gave me a 30% chance to double how much I crafted, which roughly comes out to 234 per craft. So on average, I should be getting about 234 ammo per craft. So to craft 100,000 ultracite ammo, I would need roughly 428 crafts, assuming I get 234 ammo per craft. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out that way. I needed quite a bit more than that. I think I ended up needing about 480 crafts to reach my 100,000 goal. I'm not sure if that's because Super Duper does not always proc or what the deal is, but For whatever reason, I got far less per craft than I thought I would. But in terms of the planning and the prep work, let's go forward assuming that I would need 428 crafts. So each of these 428 ultracite ammo crafts will require 40 steel scrap, 10 lead scrap, 12 gunpowder, and 1 stable violet flux. This comes out to 17,120 steel scrap, 4,280 lead scrap, 5,136 gunpowder, and 428 stable violet flux. So those are the materials that we need. Let's talk about how I got them. I decided to start my farming adventure with the stable violet flux, since that's a thing that people seem to think was the most difficult to get that much of. So crafting 428 stable violet flux would mean that I would need roughly 428 each of glowing mass, hardened mass, ultracite scrap, and of course high radiation fluids. I'd also need 4,280 raw violet flux, which would have to be farmed at the end of the process because it does spoil. To farm the glowing mass, hardened mass, and high radiation fluids, there was really only one choice. Whitesprings obviously is the best place to farm those, as the ghouls drop these in abundance. Now the interesting thing about glowing mass, hardened mass, and high radiation fluids is that they were public drops, meaning that if I killed a ghoul and someone else walked up to it and looted it, they would get whatever of those materials was on it and I wouldn't get them. Bethesda recently changed that, so now if you kill a ghoul, your loot on that ghoul is going to be yours and yours alone. This is a very welcome change in my opinion, because the whole reason I was at Whitesprings was to farm ghouls for these materials, and when someone else took them, it was very, very annoying. Unfortunately, they've also increased the global respawn time on mobs, meaning that if I go to an area and mobs spawn because I have gone to that area and clear them out, someone else comes by 5 minutes later, the mobs may not have respawned yet. Because of this, I had to find a route that would take me through all of Whitesprings efficiently, while also allowing enough time for respawns to happen. So the best method I found for this was to start at the Whitesprings train station. I had my alts camp set up there so I could scrap, repair, and stash stuff, and then proceeding through the housing section of Whitesprings, eventually making my way to the golf club, clearing that out, and then making my way back towards the Whitesprings train station. Now, although I did this using 2 characters, 2 accounts, you could easily do this with a friend. The main advantage here of having 2 accounts is that I can reload the game over and over, and I don't have to wait for a friend to tag stuff or to pick up their loot. Basically, if you're in a group with someone, you can get loot from the same mobs that the person kills if you don't even tag it, but you have to be within a certain range. What I've found, though, is it's kind of buggy. It doesn't always give you loot, and of course, if you're not tagging the mob, you get no experience. I wish this would be changed a bit. I really do wish that Bethesda would just allow us to group up with someone, and if they get a kill, you get experience and loot as well. It kind of kills the urge to group for me, because I want to be able to play as efficiently as possible, killing stuff as quick as I can, and I don't want to have to wait for someone else to tag mobs. It's also important to note that you do not get glowing and hardened mass and high radiation fluids unless there is actually a nuke present in the zone. Glowing bloated ghouls will continue to spawn even after the nuke dissipates, but they will not have those materials on them. So we are on a timer when we're farming for this stuff. So during my farming in Whitesprings, I found that it takes roughly 2 hours for a nuke to go away after launched, and over those 2 hours, I got roughly 80 of hardened mass, glowing mass, and high radiation fluids. Of course, I was fighting other players for these drops quite frequently. It should be a lot easier if I do this in the future. In the end, it took me about 12.5 hours of farming to do 5 sessions of farming Whitesprings, and I ended up with about 480 to 500 of each of the materials that I was farming there. The other 2 ingredients I would need for Stable Violet Flux were, of course, Raw Violet Flux and Ultracite. Both of these could be farmed from the Scorch Beast Queen event. So often when I see people nuking the Prime Fissure site, I see them putting the nuke in the lower right-hand corner of the map as far as the nuke will go pretty much, making sure they get the Fissure site in, of course. Unfortunately, when you nuke in this way, you end up cutting off a large portion of the nuke zone in areas of the map that are not able to be traveled into. If you want to get the most violet flux possible whenever you're farming the queen, you should try a nuke where I am showing you here. This will also hit the abandoned train yard, a good area to farm more glowing mass, hardened mass, and high radiation fluids, in addition to having the possibility of high-level glowing Mirelurk Kings or super mutants that might be legendary. All told, it took me about 45 minutes to run a silo, kill the Scorch Beast Queen, and then do a farming route for Violet Flux on both of my characters. This yielded me roughly 450 Raw Violet Flux per run. Between the event itself giving me about 10 to 20 Ultracite Scrap per run and the random Scorch Beasts that I killed, I had all the Ultracite Scrap I would ever need, so Ultracite was never an issue. So at the end of the day, it took me about 10 Scorch Beast Queen runs and Violet Flux runs to get all of the Flux and Ultracite Scrap that I needed. This took me about 7.5 hours, which if you remember, it took me about 12.5 hours to get the other stuff, so all told, it took roughly 20 hours to get 428 plus Stable Violet Flux. Technically, since I was aiming for 428 total Stable Violet Flux, I didn't need to farm as much as I did. However, in the end, when I was crafting the ammo itself, I did not get anywhere near the 30% proc rate on Super Duper that I thought I would, meaning that I was short by quite a bit and all the extra ended up getting used. So thankfully I had plenty to make the 100,000 mark. The next step on my journey was to get roughly 17,000 steel, but of course since I had extra on the Stable Violet Flux, I thought I would get extra on the steel as well. There are two ways to get steel in Fallout 76, the first being to mine it from the ground in excavator armor and then refine it with acid, which turns out is a horrible way of farming this because you just don't get anywhere near enough to make it worth your time, and acid is quite rare. The second way is to just kill super mutants and take their weapons and scrap them. Killing mutants and scrapping their weapons turned out to be the far more effective use of my time. To maximize the steel per run, I ran both Harper's Ferry and West Tech Research Center. You may ask why not just West Tech? Well, the reason was because with the new respawn timers, I was running into the respawn timer if I just cleared West Tech. I could clear it out in 5 or 10 minutes, and I found that the mobs there were not respawned yet. Now, I'm sure you're saying, why didn't I just server hop to different servers, maybe joining my friends on my friends list and going to their server to make sure that I got a fresh West Tech every time? Well, the issue is this is a highly farmed spot, and often if I went to different servers, if I hopped to them, the respawn timer would still be up, or there would be somebody there actively farming when I went there. So the best way that I found to do this was to pick a server and lock it down. I got the spawns locked down to where basically, unless I got very unlucky, they would be up every time I went back there because this respawn timer had just come off cooldown. So I would clear out West Tech, go to Harper's Ferry, clear that out, and by the time I reloaded and came back to West Tech, the respawn timer was just about ready. One other thing to note is that if you want to clear Harper's Ferry, you need to make sure that you find a server that spawns super mutants there. It seems to be linked to your character. I'm not sure exactly how it works, but if you find a server where super mutants spawn, it will always spawn super mutants for that character. At least it did for me. If you go there on a different server, you might get ghouls or scorched or something else. So in the end, clearing both Harper's Ferry and West Tech took me roughly 15 minutes, and I got on average 850 steel scrap per run. I also got some gunpowder and caps, but nowhere near the 5,136 gunpowder that I needed. I lost track of the exact number of runs that I did, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 runs, and I wound up with about 20,000 steel. I also got some steel from randomly scrapping stuff that I found off of ghouls and other things as well, so in the end I ended up with about 24,000 steel. If you're doing a run for steel, make sure that you have the scrapper perk equipped. It gives you a lot more. In fact, I think it doubles how much steel you get per scrap, and you also want to make sure you have fairly high intelligence because the more int you have, the more scrap you get. The steel farming portion took me roughly 7 or 8 hours. The next step in the farming process was to obtain roughly 5,000 lead scrap. Now, I'd already gotten about 1,000 lead scrap from various things I had picked up and scrapped from farming ghouls, mutants, etc. I'd also made sure that whenever I did silo runs, I picked up all of the weights in the weight rooms and scrapped that. So I was shooting for about 4,000 lead scrap from another source. Now, you could server hop and go to various places like the Flatwoods gym, the various silos, and check the gyms in there. You could also check the tin can trap spawns at Whitesprings and Pleasant Valley and several other locations, but in the end I found that it was a lot easier just to mine the ore I needed and get the acid I needed to refine it. Ore spawns are character instance, so if you wanted to, you could do this on multiple characters, and I did. I used both my main character and my secondary character just to speed things up a bit so that whenever I was farming this, I could just focus on it and get it done, but you could accomplish this in about 5 days with just one character. I think I got about, I want to say 250 or so lead ore per run of Lucky Hole Mine, and I needed roughly 1,500 or so. maybe less than that. And over a couple of days of farming it with both characters, clearing out Lucky Hole Mine, I wound up with way more than I needed. I don't know the exact amount of time this took, but it wasn't very much. I would say no more than 3 to 4 hours to get all the lead I needed and a lot more extra. Now, both to refine the lead ore and to make gunpowder, I would need acid, and acid is kind of a pain in the butt to farm. It's not my favorite thing to do. The best way to do it is, if the Fosnacht event is up, to go and farm it there, because you can get quite a bit from the beehives there, but assuming that event is not up, since it's a week long and it's seasonal, I would say your best bet is to probably go and farm Snallagasters up at Toxic Larry's Meats. You get on average about 20 acid per run, and each run takes no more than 3 minutes or so. The issue I ran into was that it took a long time for the world to sort of load. I would be taking damage from Snallagasters but not able to see them or damage them in any way, and in general, this was just a really crappy farming spot. I mean, the Snallagasters are sub-level 50, they're rarely ever legendary, there are only 3 of them there. It just was not a good time to farm these guys, so instead, I decided to go ahead and buy some acid. I bought about 2,000 acid at 3 caps per, which is a fair market price. In fact, it's overpaying a little bit. To raise the caps for this, I made sure to max out my vendor selling every day. I sold ionized meat, glowing blood, and of course I got plenty of caps from the Scorch Beast event as well. As far as finding players to buy the acid from, that was quite easy too. Head over to Reddit Market 76 and just advertise that you're buying acid at 3 caps per, or go on to the Discord for Market 76 and look around there. Plenty of people are selling junk and they will sell you acid as well. So with my roughly 5,000 lead secured, it was time to move on to the last ingredient, gunpowder. Many people will try to sell you gunpowder at roughly 1 cap per gunpowder, but that's honestly a bit of a ripoff. You can just buy the acid, farm the cloth yourself, and get roughly 19 to 20 gunpowder per craft once you figure in Super Duper, and you get way, way more. Now, the roughly 1,500 cloth that I needed was pretty easy because I had already gotten way more than that from the ghouls at Whitesprings. They drop pre-war money, which when scrapped gives you lots and lots of cloth. The acid, of course, I had already bought, so I had all the materials needed to craft all the gunpowder that I would use. So after all of that, we're finally ready to craft the ammo. I was a bit worried that I would run out of materials before reaching 100,000, but I did farm quite a bit extra in the event that I either screwed up the math somehow or I got very poor super duper procs, which actually did happen. Wait a minute. Oh, for fuck's sake, are you serious, mole rats? Now? You had to attack me now? Anyway, the farming process took a little over 30 hours. I had about 5 more hours total for vendor hopping to sell things to raise the caps needed for the acid, which brings us to 35 hours. And even if I add an additional 5 hours for muling, repairing, and generally putzing around and being inefficient, the total still only comes to 40 hours to farm all the materials needed. Now, I don't know about you, but I can easily play 40 hours of video games within a 2-week period. Maybe I wouldn't play only Fallout 76, but assuming you did, I think it's entirely reasonable to have gathered these materials in that time. And there we have it, folks, just over 100,000 50 caliber ultracite ammo farmed and crafted in under 2 weeks. So I hope this will put to rest the protests from people on the forums who clearly just don't know how to play and need to get good that you cannot craft this much ammo in a 1-month period, because I've just done it in under 2 weeks. I'd also like to note that all the activities that I did while doing this farming were also profitable in terms of farming for legendaries. I mean, farming Whitesprings ghouls, farming West Tech, doing the Scorch Beast Queen, these are all endgame activities that I would do anyway, even if I wasn't farming for ultracite ammo specifically. So it's not like I went way out of my way to do this. Now, during this farming process, I did use about 10,000 ultracite 50 caliber on the Queen. However, I used regular 50 caliber and 5mm in my Bloody Gatling gun when I wasn't farming the Queen. I do think that running 50 caliber ultracite ammo all the time would be feasible as long as I kept up on my farming, but to be frank, I don't always want to have to farm Violet Flux after every Queen run. It just gets kind of tedious and boring. The market value of this ultracite ammo is actually not very much. I think people sell it for about 1 to 2 caps a piece, so at very most I might make 150 or 200,000 caps off of that, which sounds like a lot, but in all honesty, I don't really use caps for very much. I could of course just sell 20,000 or so and then buy acid, I suppose, and that would fuel all my acid needs for many crafting runs to come. Well, ladies and gents, if you've made it this far in, I'm going to assume you probably enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could leave a like and subscribe, that would be
outstanding.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.